So maybe we felt outed in some way. Maybe, in school, we shared a secret, and that secret was exposed to everyone in the classroom. And not only is our trust violated, but we don't feel secure. Okay. And intimacy provides a sense of security. And we want to make sure that we're able to cultivate that, not with just ourselves, but the people we share with around us. So, for any reason that trust was violated, then that's how we can begin to show up around our community in nature, and not being so trusting and being very guarded. Okay, so that's when, in your relationships, think about in a grocery store, you're trusting that the cashier will keep your transaction between you. Imagine if you're in the grocery store and there's a million people, now, excuse me, and I'm being dramatic. There's a line behind you, and you go to pay for your item and you swipe your card, you're entering in your PIN number, only to find out that the cashier turns the register around and say, oh no, it's declined, it's not working. And you're looking at everyone around you and you feel outed. You now have a sense of distrust with your finances, with the individual in the store. You're now jaded. You now have a block. You now feel exposed. You now feel anxious. Each and every time you go into the store, you're anxious. You're hoping that the next person will keep your trust, right? So that's how trauma shows up in our intimate spaces, right? So be mindful where you are, feel where you are when you're, up against a conversation with your boss, when you're up against a conversation with your spouse or with your kids, or in public, or, again, speaking to a financial advisor, any of those experiences, feel where you are and where you feel guarded. So that way you have the emotional intelligence, and we'll get to that. Okay, so now we have an idea of where this trauma can show up, right? We know the spaces, so being exposed or mocked, emotional manipulation, I'm a victim of that. Being held without consent or hostage, violation of space. Again, feeling guarded whenever you're, out in the store, out in a, public place. Feeling as if, your items aren't safe, your personal space isn't safe, right? So, and when I say be mindful, this is where you see what those symptoms are. When you are struggling with, trauma and intimacy, it can show up and look like PTSD, complex PTSD, any kind of chronic anxiety, right? Depression. Maybe we may do something opposite. We may isolate, right? Headaches. If you're noticing you're having headaches, you start to get stressed, you get anxious, you have headaches. Loss of sexual attraction or appetite. Isolation, insomnia, it's keeping you up at night, right? It can show up in, stomach pains, ulcers, body dysmorphia, looking in the mirror, seeing something completely different than what's in the actual image, right, in the mirror, reflection. So this is something that I experienced after a betrayal. Every time I would get out the shower, immediately I would cover myself up, because I felt as if the person no longer valued what I, what my frame reflected, right? What showed up. And so each and every time I would get undressed, I wouldn't even look in the mirror. I would just immediately hop in the shower. I no longer wanted to see what I look like, right? I was avoiding. And a lot of that can come from those intimate traumas. You can find yourself not wanting to, again, feel exposed, feel open, feel vulnerable. You'll see that you're clenching. Watch out if you're clenching your jaw, right? Clenching your hands, right? Or folding your arms across your chest, okay? These are all displays of not being comfortable, completely comfortable. Be mindful if someone says that to you, right? So IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, very common if you've experienced some sort of violation or trauma. Irritable bowel syndrome, not properly digesting your food, it does show up in that way as well. Erotophobia, so really just a fear of your body, a fear of self-image, right? And so what I want you to take away is also your attachment style. Consider that. If you haven't, you may notice that if you're, for example, if you're an anxious individual and you want to avoid, anxious, anxiety, hold a lot of depression, where you are in an intimate space of friendship and connections, workshops. This is myself. I'm being honest. I'm going to tell the truth. That's my attachment style, is the anxious, and making sure that I'm not finding myself in avoidant connections, right? Because if that person is being avoidant, they're not acknowledging me, and so that can lead to a trigger, right? And then you start finding yourself with those behaviors of PTSD, isolation, insomnia, anxiety, irritable bowel syndrome, body dysmorphia, and so not feeling valued. So I won't get in too heavy about attachment styles. However, if you look below, you will find that information. I will link that. So once you have a clear understanding as to your attachment style, you want to make sure that you're not being tainted with that type of connection, right? So now that we know what intimacy is, now that we know that there's a trigger or there's a block, there's some sort of emotional upset or physical discomfort, what do I do with that, right? Because we don't want to avoid it, which is very common. We don't want to avoid these uncomfortable feelings, right? You're saying, Tanya, but I don't want to do it. I don't want to deal with it. Yes, but you have to in order to progress and get to that organic happiness, right? And so how do I deal? How do I recalibrate? How do I readjust this trauma that I have in order for me to have a fulfilling connection with nature, with my pets, with myself, right? Because most importantly is we want to have a successful, fulfilling connection with ourselves. That's the most important part, right? Because just like Dr. Smith advises, it is the foundation of a relationship. The intimacy is a foundation of a relationship, and that is crucial. That is what we need. We want to have a strong foundation in any relationship, whether it's with ourselves, with our finances, with a friend, with our colleagues, our schoolmates, our financial advisors, our instructors. With these individuals, we want to make sure that relationship, that connection is strong. In order to have strength, you must have a strong foundation, right? And so the first thing is take your time. Once we have the knowledge of what it is, of when this issue may have happened, how did this discomfort or upset began, right? When this upset began, we have to realize that it's going to take time. Sometimes we want those things right overnight, and it doesn't happen that way. I promise you, it doesn't happen that way. And, I just a minute ago, not even, had a conversation very quickly, and we got on the topic of this topic of intimacy. And I said, why, Why do you find yourself, well, what happened in that quick conversation? I asked her, I said, well, what happened with, how did it show up for you? She says, well, I thought I was over it. I thought I was over that feeling. And, I thought I healed it. Then it just showed up out of nowhere. And that's exactly what happens when it comes to our traumas. If the more that we ignore it, the longer it will linger, and the more it will show up, whether that's in your dreams, whether that's, in a conversation, in a text, in a phone call. It could be as simple as an image that shows up on your news feed and you see it, there's a trigger, and you do not understand why you are having your, again, IBS, right? Headaches, because we have not allowed ourselves acknowledge, there's a lion here. I think it came in when I opened the door. And so we haven't allowed ourselves to acknowledge the experience, right? And so understanding that it's going to take time. It's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be months. It may take years, and that is okay, right? The next thing is the emotional intelligence, right? The emotional intelligence of what it is that is happening, right? I think I'm going through this because of this. I think I'm feeling this because of this. And once we are aware, this is when you start to write it down. If you listen to this podcast, the Get Your Happy podcast, I talk about writing things down, the power of words. If you have a very difficult time writing it down, this is the part where you get in front of a camera, you hit play, and you just blurt out anything that you're feeling, right? You make it private, you put it wherever you need to put it, that way it's in a safe space, and so you play it back and watch how much you grow and evolve. Okay, the next thing is seeking professional guidance, whether if it's life coach like me, a counselor, a mentor, a therapist, psychologist, wherever you feel you need to be, a sibling, anywhere you need to be in order to be able to bounce back those emotions that you're experiencing, and someone that you trust, right? And the next thing is to exercise. Getting the body moving helps the body release any of those blocks that are not being fully expressed, and it allows you to exercise your, whether it's your voice or your, your legs, or, your lymphatic system, your nervous system, because when those traumas happen, they tend to get trapped and you're unable to progress forward. So making sure you're getting your body moving. Lastly, creating a safe space. Create a safe space for yourself to be able to, explore, right? Maybe you have to physically explore yourself. Maybe maybe you have to emotionally explore, right? If it takes sitting down crying or writing or laughing, whatever those things are, but creating somewhere safe, because when trauma happens, that's the number one thing, is we want to feel safe. That is the basic survival need for us to have. And if it wasn't given to us from our parental figures or legal guardians, we have to then create it. It was something that I needed in a space of my last trauma with my divorce. I needed to create a space that was safe for me, right? So that is it. What I do want to leave you with is what Dalai Lama explains in the Art of Happiness. He was interviewed here in Arizona, and he describes intimacy as having compassion and connection. And once you develop that, you develop it for yourself and for others in the world around you. And you see the world through a different lens, and you feel something different. And what happens is that intimacy strengthens, right? That trust, that vulnerability, that openness and compassion, it begins to strengthen, and it fills up with love. That's it for this podcast, and I hope you enjoyed it. I really, really, really am glad that I'm beating retrograde, because it's been a time getting this recorded. Remember to like this video, share it if someone needs it, but most importantly, most importantly, is feel free to connect with me. Live abundantly, love your authenticity, and radiate organic happiness. See you back.